We are live.
Hi, everyone. Welcome again to what is going to be a masterful Beit Abulafia class. We have Jason Kaplan, our wonderful host, who has gathered these amazing people to join us. Some friends who are watching right now, thank you for joining us live. Many more will be joining on later when Jason posts the recording. And we have the prestigious Dr. Alan Brill, Rabbi Dr. Alan Brill, pardon me, with us today to share some unbelievable thoughts. His work experience is a novel itself. So in a second, Jason, I'm going to have you share some of his bio, but Dr. Brill, please welcome. We are so happy that you are joining us today. Thank you for being
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
wonderful. Jason, tell us some of the Megillah links, information about Dr. Brill's experience.
Well, before I begin, thank you, Shosh, for hosting. Welcome to
Of
Beit
course.
Abulafia, everybody. And just a very special thank you to Shoshana Sanker for hosting this. With all of her media background, she's really made this click and made the format really enjoyable for all of our listeners and for myself and for our guests to join. It's really neat to have Dr. Rabbi Alan Brill with us. I've been aware of him since I've been at Yeshiva University. I was not able to take his courses. I was in a different part of the Yeshiva learning. But I kept up with his works, his writings, even kept up by email and asked if he would join us. I'm very, very grateful to you, Dr. Brill, for joining us. Let me do a brief bio. This is on the Seton Hall website. Rabbi Professor Alan Brill is Cooperman Ross Endowed Chair for Jewish Christian Studies at Seton Hall University. Alan Brill specializes in interfaith theology, mysticism, Kabbalah, Jewish thought, and comparative theology. He's the author of many books, including Judaism and World Religions, Christianity, Islam, and Eastern Religions, Judaism and Other Religions, Models of Understanding. I'm going to go on just a little bit further. Brill was a Fulbright Senior Scholar Award for research and teaching at Banaras Hindu University in Varanasi, Uttar Pradesh, India. Hope I said that correctly. During his award, he taught 2 graduate level courses in India. This research produced his recent volume, Rabbi in the Ganges, a Jewish Hindu encounter. And Dr. Brill was awarded a Dorset Visiting Fellowship for 2 extended stays at Yarton Manor at Oxford University, UK. Coming up, there's a new book, Jewish Trinity, Contemporary Christian Theology Through Jewish Eyes, and another book on Jewish theology of religious diversity, and another work comparing Kabbalistic visualizations to Tantric visualizations. Amazing. I hope I pronounced most of those words correctly. And with that, that's just one part of the bio. Please check that out on the Seton Hall website to see how prolific he is and what a unique guest we have tonight. And with that, Shoshana, please let's start the conversation.
Well, we're out of time now. No, I'm just kidding. Dr. Brill, so those were sort of the nuts and bolts, right, of some of your professional experiences. Give us just a little bit more information about your life and your work and just another 1 or 2 minutes, and then we'll dive into some really of the good info here.
So basically, I went to YU for college and smicha. I then did a doctorate in mysticism at Fordham. I then became a teacher of Jewish mysticism. Um, I then was invited to start getting involved in interfaith through my teacher, Rabbi Walter Wurzberger from Yeshiva University. After 9/11, interfaith picked up. It became this incredible need that religion is in the media again. It became this amazing change. I wound up being invited through all sorts of interfaith events. I wound up giving a paper in 2004 on a Jewish theology of religions at a meeting of with the rabbis and cardinals, which then became a book. I wound up doing interfaith full time. I have a chair in interfaith. I then wound up getting a Fulbright to go to India, where I taught Hindus and Buddhists. I then have been all over in different countries doing interfaith. Um, and now I'm highly involved in Indonesia. I'll be back in Jakarta this summer, but I've taught on the graduate level in Jakarta in Indonesia and in other places. And that's really, once the interfaith got started, it snowballed um, over the last 20 years.
Amazing. I think our word of today is going to be interfaith. So every time we say, I'm just kidding. Um, it's amazing everything that you have done, and I'm really excited. I think everybody's really excited to listen to some of your personal stories and some of your thoughts and how these books came about. But I want to start with your academic training and how it led to your interfaith work and meditation work. And I'm wondering if you think that sort of combining all of those things together is kind of unique. You know, we think of academics in one way and we think of the other part of this, the meditation, the interfaith sort of, they don't really coexist all the time together in the ways that I think regular people would think of
Right.
them. So talk through that a little bit and then share, you know, you've been out in all of these places over the world. And so how were you able to use all of that as you're
Yeah.
heading out in the world to talk and learn and discuss all of
Right.
these things together?
So the first one is I went off and I started my doctorate at Hebrew University. And therefore, everybody who's learning Kabbalah, Hasidut is in some way a semi-practitioner, as are most people who are doing degrees in Catholic or Islamic mysticism, a semi-practitioner. That doesn't mean they're going to be a great teacher, but in some way, you are a practitioner of it. And so it's not as rare. People then, branch out in different places. And then winding my trajectory brought me back to having students that were very interested in the actual practitioner part of what I do. Um, and I also wound up, I mean, it's a side story. I actually started teaching Kavanot meditation by accident because I just knew it from my own practice and from the books. And I taught high school briefly between graduate school and becoming a professor. And you're assigned to do a prayer group, a tefillah group. And trust me, high school kids are not the best disciplined and all that. And I
Right.
basically said, look, you're coming along with me for the ride. Whether you like it or not, you can transfer to a different room. But I started doing all sorts of meditation and focus with them. And rather than being fired on the spot by the principal, it turned out to be very effective. And that's how I wound up, teaching it. Um, and became part of a public persona rather than a private practitioner.
Okay, so then when you're taking it out into other places, not just in the classrooms, and you're going, you know, out in the field, what is that experience like as you've sort of been on this
So,
trajectory and journey?
okay. So I'll start with some of the more recent ones, the backwards. There's a difference in when we come back between book knowledge and actual knowledge. And
Right.
there's a difference between what we call knowledge of religion from books and actual interfaith knowledge. So
Okay.
I wound up, for example, in Indonesia teaching a course in comparative mysticism a few years ago. Because why did I get it, even though I'm not the most conversant in Indonesian Islamic mysticism or Bali practices, is because I had the hands-on ability to understand what it's talking about, to understand why people are doing it, what they're doing it, to flow with the conversation, rather than saying, oh, here's a 10th century manuscript that let's talk about the philology of it.
Okay. Amazing.
Um, So in that sense, it became the hands-on made me, the hands-on person of interreligious interactions,
That's amazing. And we're going to get back to that in a second because I want to talk about the differences between interfaith and interreligious. But
right?
Jason, I want to bring you in because like I'm picturing you as a studious college student or in high school and you're so into this interfaith study and meditation now. Could you have seen yourself maybe back in the day? Is this something that you would have jumped into if Dr. Brill, you know, was around at this time for you?
I think so. I love reading his book. The first one I read was Thinking God of Rav Sadok of Lublin, and I loved his writing. And I thought, oh, if I could have studied with him, but I have a hard time sitting still, so I don't know if the scholarly life would have fit for me. I just cannot sit in a seat for too long. So I didn't know if I could really go through master's or PhD studies, which is always impressive to me when I understand what people need to do for their dissertation.
Right.
And I'll also say that I really enjoyed Abulafia and meeting people of different faiths. And my particular way is to talk with them through music. But what I really love about bringing on Dr. Brill as a very unique guest is someone who does that interfaith as someone very aware of the Torah and our own deep traditions and is very comfortable doing interfaith. So I believe there are other people who hear from Dr. Brill that are doing this, but as a unique person in my perspective, it's so unique to have him on, giving us his experience and perspective on this interfaith work.
Agreed. So let's jump to Interfaith 101, Dr. Brill, if you would. So start us out explaining on our level what the definition really of this interfaith work is, and if you've noticed it change over the years that you've been on this journey. And then let's jump into the difference between interfaith and interreligious.
Okay. So interfaith, um, when most people today use the word interfaith as whatever it meant in the 1960s, as if you have two different teams, the Jewish team facing off against the Catholic team, the Catholic team facing off against the Muslim team. Um, and that was a certain position of the 1960s and 70s. And you use the word interfaith for that, how one religion relates to another. And when it comes to theology, when you'll ask, how does Judaism relate to other Western religions or Asian religions? That's interfaith. But now we tend to use the word interreligious, meaning a lot of what you're doing in the Universal Language Room in Beit Abulafia is now called interreligious because there are no two teams facing off.
Mm.
It is now how all of the religions are playing off of one another in the kind of diversity that we actually live in. We live in diverse places. Online, we communicate with people in diverse ways. And even to say, what does it mean to have a Jewish teacher teaching Catholic students or teaching Hindu students? The looking at those things is interreligious. Or how do you now have a religious diversity in New Jersey? You call those questions interreligious because it's how everything is playing off of one another in its full diversity. We also now have the change of, and this is the bigger one, the last one, of what's called actual interfaith or interreligious knowledge. Meaning a lot of people think interfaith is, oh, I'm going to read a comparative religion textbook and know about other religions. Interfaith knowledge is you can't walk up to the average Catholic on the street and ask them about some question in Thomas Aquinas. You can't walk up to some random Jew in the street and ask some question of Sadia Gaon, section 2, paragraph 1. Is at a certain point, it's not the way it works. Interreligious knowledge is actually knowing what it is when you meet people, what are they bringing, the differences when you walk up to Jews, the difference between whether somebody is Reform, Orthodox, non-denominational, just ethnic, different Christian groups, knowing the difference that a Calvinist Beit evangelical is not a Catholic, is not a Unitarian, is that's a certain basic knowledge that's not in the textbooks, but it's actually knowing what is. And that's really the direction my life went in, is really having that knowledge and that ability to
Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry.
think
Go
on the
ahead.
ground in those situations.
So I actually want to come back to that because I want to talk about how you've used everything that you've learned in your own personal life and how maybe it's shaped choices you've made and things like that. But Jason, I want to ask you first, now that we're understanding the difference between interfaith and interreligious, does that make you think about your band differently that you've got together with all these amazing musicians from different walks of life together?
Yes, I think so. I think that Interreligious for me was born out of the fact that I went to an interfaith conference in Chicago in 2006. And it was very much like Dr. Brill described of we are the Muslims and the Jews think this way, the Muslims think this way, and the Christians have this. And I just thought, where are we going with this? I mean, so they get 5 points and we get 3 points and someone calls a timeout. It just felt like a game. And
Hmm.
I really was not impressed. And I was really developing the universal language room to just kind of skip over that. What's really exciting for me is Dr. Brill is saying that in his work, he found some of those older models unsatisfactory and built these models. And so the other model that I built was having a rock, funk, hip hop band with people of Sikh Baha'i
Yeah.
traditions to just get together and jam out, not discuss the text. But if you ask me, I would love that people could collaboratively discuss the text. And I think that's what we're hearing from Dr. Brill. It's very
Yeah.
exciting for me.
So, I mean, I do both, But the point is, Jason really hit on the point. It is now about the interreligiosity of it. It's not about the scoring of the teams. It's coming together. And we tend to call what Jason's doing. We see that's going on. We see we live in a pluralistic, diverse America. And it's all the more so now with the web. We understand what that means, and we tend to use the word interreligious for that. But professionally, I still will write from a Jewish point of view and or represent the Jewish team when I'm called to do that.
Right. Okay, so good. So now that you are, this walking encyclopedia, some people on here might not even know what an encyclopedia is, walking a human of knowledge with all these religions you've studied and all these interpersonal relationships, how does that shape choices that you make personally, Jewishly, in your work, that kind of thing?
Well, certainly, I mean, there's a lot of things to say about that. Um, Certainly, it helps you redefine what you are as a Jew much stronger.
How so?
If you're coming with a strong Jewish background or a strong self-identity, playing off of these other things, you have a real sense of where you fit in, of your same and difference, where are the irreconcilable differences and where are the universal commonalities. There's a certain sense of you have a sharper identity, meaning there's a certain point as coming from Americans, we have much more sharper identities about what we buy in the grocery store or our politics or what we read.
Yes.
And our religion can sometimes be quite, ethnic or just our enclave, rather than really thinking through where do we have where are we, our self-identity in religious terms.
Right. It's more of like there's a lot of people I feel who may just be culturally Jewish, culturally Christian, right? And not knowing all of the other, details that make us who we are really and all the learnings and the
Yeah.
teachings. Yeah.
And, and at the other hand, a completely different thing is we also become reflected in other religions and see our own traditions differently. Meaning this whole emphasis on Jewish meditation today, rather than just saying there are Kabbalistic Kavanot, Kabbalistic intentions, calling it meditation is in some way the reflection of the encounter with what's out there. And
I'm
it
ready to
lets us
sign up.
reframe what we're doing differently.
Hopefully, right?
And I'm
Hopefully.
not just saying even the mystical and meditation people, even the people who are now reframing Judaism who are law professors and are reframing Judaism now in terms of law. It's a reframing that you see yourself in the mirror and you go back to your own tradition,
Yeah.
with a sharper resolution and sharper sense of what needs to be developed.
That would be super powerful if more people could focus in on that. And I'm also ready to sign up for all of your classes, by the way, and we're only into this like 19 minutes. So great, let's keep going. But you brought up meditation again, so I want to move the conversation that way. And I want you to talk about in a second, Dr. Brill, the differences of the Kavanot that we briefly talked about beforehand, before we started. Jason, though, before we dive into that with Dr. Brill, give us just a little bit about Beit Abulafia and the permutation writing and the music. That way it'll give us a little bit of a foundation, and then we can jump to the other things that Dr. Brill is going to share with us about this.
That's great timing, Shoshana, because he brought up the idea of encountering other groups helps you sharpen what you're doing in your own life. So I've had a very strong connection with the Sikh community who really taught me about Simran, repeating God's name, Waheguru, repeating it, and then coming to a connection to God. And I sat and practiced with them and used Hashem's name or Adon Olam. But then I thought, well, what would I do in my Jewish tradition? I think I should repeat a name, but I feel like there's something else, and that really did lead me to Abulafia. So I'm very, very grateful for the Sikhs to embrace me and show me their tradition. And I went back to see what does the Jewish tradition say about the names of God. And Abulafia said, start to permutate the name of God. Take the four-letter name of Hashem, Yud K Vav K, or Yud and a Hey and a Vav and a Hey, and put it in, at that point, 12 different permutations. So then I applied it to music and made melodies of permutations of notes that went with those letters. So it is exactly like Dr. Brill is saying. My experience with the Sikh people really enabled me to find Abulafia in that unique Jewish tradition. I wouldn't have probably been able to do it without the Sikhs.
Amazing. That's fantastic. Okay, so Dr. Brill, bring us to now the unique aspect of the Jewish meditation that you know about and that you teach with the Kavanot, and then how yoga Kavanot differs from Tantra Kavanot. So give us
Okay.
the whole picture.
Okay. So lot on the table now.
I
I want
know,
to go
it's a
back to
lot.
Jason's point. No, there's actually somebody wrote a book comparing Sikh meditations to Jewish meditation. I mean,
Jason's
not a
gonna go order
scholar,
that right
somebody
now.
who's actually a practitioner, a Jewish woman who moved from New York to India. Um, but I mean, the point is coming for I am is I can move knowing these are Sikh doing a japa of a divine name, which
Mhm.
is different than doing in a Muslim fiqh and repeating the name. There's a certain tonal quality they all have. Abulafia has his quality. Um, so I naturally gravitated to the Kavanot within Kabbalah. Now, the Kavanot are certain visualizations of lights or names. I gravitated not to the auditory, not to the sound. I'm not a musician, but to the visual aspects, and in which words of prayer have a certain visual assent to them or a visual connect to a divine name with vowel points. And I naturally did that with a sense of now, when I started doing this, teaching people how to sit and focus was the bigger part, um, and telling people that they've got to focus. And so that's really what I teach, what I work on. I'll come back another time and do a session.
We would love that, please.
But I've also learned, I've spoken, for example, I mean, after much study, I determined that the Kavanot that I'm doing have much more in common with a variety of practices called Tantra, with the visualization toward a oneness rather than the yogic focus, single mind. And I actually went back to India another time and spoke in the Tantra Institute in Delhi, and they agreed with me. I then went up and visited the certain ashram circuit and spoke to all the meditators. Asked, is these practices, are they like this or like that? Are they like this or like that? So I got their insight, and I don't think I'll take decades to process everything they told me. I just recorded it because, you know, you show them a Kabbalistic practice and then they're rattling off, and I'm just saying, give me and um,
It's
what it all
amazing.
is. But there was definitely a sense of validation. So if you have a practice that is a single focus, that tends to be yogic. It's a form of what's called in their language dhyana, leading to a samadhi, um, as opposed to the tantric, where you're getting into this whole God realm, this interdivine realm, by engaging in the activity. Personally, I'm not a big fan of the word meditation because it's a strange word that came in from the Theosophic societies. The word meditation really was something Christians did. You went to a monastery and you meditated on the divine word. The Theosophic society then applied it to almost everything 100 years ago. But I'm much more comfortable saying kavanot for Jewish, meaning attentions, for Abulafia, permutations of the letters, for what to be much more descriptive, is probably a much better activity at this point than using one word for all of them.
Yeah, I'm a big old word nerd. I'm a writer and an editor, so I totally appreciate that. Yes, that makes perfect sense. Yes. Do you find that when you're explaining the differences or when you're teaching, some of these little details that make all these things different with the different Kavanot, do you get feedback from your students or from whatever other classes you're giving and people really they like one over the other or they're drawn to both or they get something different from each of them? What do people tell you?
100%.
Okay.
100%. So I stopped teaching in public for many years because meditation, whatever, 15 years ago, 18 years ago, meant I'm already doing uh, uh, breath meditations, mindfulness, or a healing circle.
Right.
Not what I was doing. But during COVID, we had a backyard prayer circle in Binyan, and I led meditation before we started. So I got back into the teaching of it every week. And they're very clear. They like these practices and not those practices. They want to do these and not those.
So
And sometimes I
interesting.
listened, sometimes I didn't. Depends on where I wanted to go with it.
Right. Jason, I wonder if when you're teaching your ULR classes and we've got the permutations and there's definitely an element of meditation in your work too, do you find the same thing too, that people sort of they're geared toward different avenues of what you're offering?
I think so. I didn't realize how much in alignment I would be with Dr. Brill this evening. I didn't know the answers. So I also was at Emory University and they're telling me about meditation and quiet my mind and no thoughts and no self. And I was like, I'm Jewish. This thing does not stop. This is
Yeah.
always on. And for me, it was very exciting to find Abulafia and a methodology that said, go for it, go with the thinking, and it's alive and it's happening and maybe direct it. So I have found with music that people can choose different melodies, different songs, different timbres. The choice within music is so vast that we don't necessarily need to talk about techniques, but people can say, oh, I like the drum, or I like the xylophone, or I like the minor scale or the major scale. So that variety within music, I think is great. But what's so exciting about tonight's discussion with Dr. Brill is he's expanding my ideas about anything to do with intentions and Kavanot, which I have not explored. And so now for me, I'm thinking, oh, this is fantastic. I'd like to discover what's going on here.
Yeah. So, like I said, for whatever reason, this westernized American mindfulness has taken over America, that you say the word and that's what they think you mean.
Right.
Um, but that's not even true about the Buddhist tradition or anything else. It's what's in America right now. But certainly uh, there are just so many forms of focus and vision and expanding consciousness and and really now this I mean if you really want nobody's really could be a scholar of meditation. Now you're a scholar of consciousness or consciousness studies or
Right.
contemplative studies is the word,
Words
in
now.
which there are now, you're not going to do an anthology like in the 70s, Varieties of Meditation. Now we'll come out with a title, Varieties of Contemplation or Contemplative Studies. Because now we'll differentiate between whether you're focusing, whether it's free form or not, all these different things in which every tradition has developed some form of the spectrum of it.
Right. So if people who are here now watching later want to explore more of these ideas that you teach, that you write about, just for the everyday people to access your writings and techniques, how would they do those things? What is sort of like on our level?
On your level, so I have a number of other interviews, some of them from all sorts of, ones that are most relevant to this are the less technical ones, the more popular ones. I did an interview for Shefa, which deals with now the Jews are interested into psychedelic experimentation, and they wanted one about where Jewish meditation fits in.
Fun.
I did one for um, Kohenet, the women's spirituality movement. They got me to talk about these sort of things. And those were very hands-on practical discussions, not academic in any way. They were really how to, and how to evaluate. Those are
Amazing.
probably some nice places to start.
Yes,
There
agreed.
was once a whole series of me giving meditation back in Web 1.0 from a long time ago that disappeared into oblivion.
You could recreate it now, but like, with everything that you know now, it would be like leveled up even more.
But somehow it was just so much to be to be um, younger and carefree and just getting up there and doing it. It was just something, that I can't recreate anymore.
Right. Times are different now. Yes. Time
Yes.
progresses. I want to talk a little bit about universalism. Jason, when we do these, and for sure in ULR classes too, we talk a lot about universalism. Share your thoughts on that. And then Dr. Brill, I want you to talk about maybe the various types that we may not have even considered that there are in this one
Right.
word. It's not just the one thing.
Yeah. So
Well,
once again, I'm going to agree with Jason, but I want to separate this out.
Okay.
There's the universalism in terms of what does it mean to be a human? Like, you know, killing one person as if you kill the whole world, or the dignity of all human beings, the human rights, human dignity, respect at the core of religion. That's one type of humanism. There's another type of humanism that we all have a soul and a prayer life that's all seeking to return and move. And you see Jason's right shaking his head. That's a very different sort than some, it's a different sense that we have that religion touches a core, a soul, a point within all of us that's seeking to return or to seeking to be actualized, or whatever language you want to use. That's a different type of universalism. Some Jews will get up there, and this is where I think Jason will appreciate the distinction. There are those who have a universalism in Judaism, but it's pushed off to the Messianic age.
Hmm.
Someday God's name will be one. Not now, but someday God and his name will be one, which is ever receding form of universalism. Meaning, yes, we're striving for it, we're working for it. It's rather than let's take out the guitar and the keyboard and the chanting, and right now let's touch our souls. That's a different activity, and it generates a very sort of how can we push the universe forward type of universalism. Um, and they're very different um, sorts of universalism. So sometimes I'm doing interfaith and interreligiosity, where the goal is the first category. What can we establish as universal moral principles? We're not really interested in your soul or experiencing anything or taking out the guitar. On the other hand, you can go off to Indonesia, and that's the first thing they want to start with you. Oh, we're going to be chanting by the Sufi shrine at midnight tonight. Bring your instruments. That's a very different sort of universalism.
Indeed, there's a flavor for everyone, right? They're just
Yeah,
whatever speaks to them, there's something out there for them.
that's right.
Okay.
So, I
Um,
mean, to give you a real concrete example, since I gave you the musical one, the Jason one first, in Indonesia, they tend to be this mystical oneness music art form. But I was actually one of the people everyone thinks about the Abraham Accords, but I was one of the people who were there the years before. These things
mm,
take years of visiting. And there you were giving talks on universalism in terms of, do you all respect that we're all in the image of God? Do you respect do not kill? Do you respect the universal morality? That's a very different form. And in that context, that's what you brought to it.
right. Jason, how does the things that Dr. Brill is sharing with us play into your thoughts about universalism, what you share in your classes, that kind of thing?
yeah, so I'll just, by way of biography, I just started with the Orthodox community at Emory, and I just was within that tension, meditating and feeling these universal feelings. But the more I was in the more of the Hasidic world, it had the inversion of pulling more into like a one neighborhood and one worldview. So I really couldn't resolve that for many years. I went to Yeshiva University to study, and I thought, I do want to be Orthodox. I do think this is the right way to be a Jew, but it made me feel like I was into one neighborhood, and I was very fortunate to be having this exploration in New York City, where the whole world is one subway ride away. So that's really what pushed me, because I didn't have the ability, or actually at the time, interest to study other people's faith books and text. So I thought, well, why don't we just talk through music and have this type of experience where also it wasn't just for the meditative experience. We were really exchanging information through the melodies. There was an information exchange. So I like that, because we were expressing ideas and talking back and forth, but through the music. So I've felt that the universalism that I was looking for kept my commitment to Orthodox or Halachic Judaism intact while I exchanged ideas with other people. And I didn't know at the time, I started the Universal Language Room in 2009, that I would find a teacher in Abulafia. So it's been a tremendous blessing to find a teacher in Abulafia who I believe said these things 800 years ago. And then double the blessing with Dr. Brill saying, I'm doing this work out in the world, really inside the text and this interreligious movement, which I have not heard that term before. This is really, really great for me to hear different models of universalism and for our viewers too.
Yeah, it's fantastic. So obviously, Jason chooses these incredible guests that we have on here to share with everybody, but this one I feel is like a little extra special just for Jason. So yay, good job. Okay, we've sort of teased a little bit, Dr. Brill, about your adventures across the world, and we've talked about Indonesia and India, UAE you've been to, and Rome, like all of these incredible places across the map. Can you make some of these come to life for us and give us more of these stories, maybe from some of those places, that would just like fascinate us and make us wow, even though we're already there already? Give us more.
Uh, so, I mean, we'll pick a city first, and I'll give you.
Okay, I'll pick one. Rome. That's one of my favorite places ever.
Okay. So, Rome is obviously, the place you go to for all sorts of. There, it's interfaith, not interreligious. You clearly belong to a team.
Right. Yes.
But there was one day. Okay, so you get to know the priests. And this story I like telling because it shows both same and difference. There was a priest who introduced himself that he had studied Judaism at Hebrew University in Jerusalem and Israel.
Mhm.
He had some Hebrew, he had sit in Hebrew University courses, he knew something about Judaism. And like I was walking with my wife through Rome. Um, And she'll tell you the great interreligious story that she went out with the Muslim women shoe shopping because
That's
none of them
amazing.
had flat heels to walk on the cobblestones of Rome. They all
Oh
came
no,
thinking they have to dress up for the big events, so they all bought flat heels there. But that's her story.
that's
But the story
fantastic.
that I want to tell is we're standing like in a piazza with lots of churches and things, and this
Sure.
priest walks up to us and says, "Can't you feel the Shekhinah here?" And my wife and I look at each other because for him, the Shekhinah means the Holy Spirit, the sense of inspiration in Catholicism, the sense that you're being moved religiously. And for us, the Shekhinah tends to be the part of God that goes into exile with us in the long exile. It tends to be the sense of presence that's with the Jewish people. The Shekhinah tends to be what meets you when you show up in shul, and the locution both showed a sense of sameness, certainly coming from a same first century neighborhood of language, which he used, but at the same time, it showed profound differences about how we actually think about these things, formulate these things, and it actually gets you to think about how you use the term, what it means, and how you would talk about these things.
Yeah. That's so neat. I feel like you could write a book about each place you visited, and just even if it's just been like a week-long trip, it would be enough,
So
right?
pick another place.
Okay, so let's talk about India a little bit. I feel like that's sort of a magical kind
So
of far
India,
off
so I
location.
spent an academic year in India.
Wow.
I lived among the Brahmins in Varanasi. That's the holy city where they burn the dead, and it's filled with
Wow.
um, holy people. And I lived among the faculty and the faculty on campus. The faculty in philosophy and religion are all Brahmins. So understand that. And I got to live on their cycle of life. And they let me really, and I taught with them. And there I taught an introduction to Judaism, which was really exotic for them. They could take courses in Buddhist and Hindu meditations, and for them, that's part of the curriculum. But Judaism,
Right.
that's exotic.
Right?
So parts of teaching that, my class was half Hindu and half Buddhist. The Buddhist, because Thailand doesn't have a strong university on a graduate level, so there's a whole dormitory. They send the monks to India for training. And so I'm teaching this classroom, and I had one or two faculty members sit in, and I'm like going through, Jewish ideas. And when we get to a certain part in Genesis, this one faculty member jumps up and says, "Oh, that's God in search of man," which is the title of the book by Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, meaning it lets you really understand that God does not go searching for you in the Hindu Puranas.
Okay.
But in the Bible, God is seeking you. There's a certain reflection of even understanding your own sense much better. From that, I also discovered that they would consider Maimonides as guide of the perplexed yoga,
Interesting.
because yoga is taking you away from the undisciplined materialism,
Uh,
falsehood of this world, and perfecting you mentally to bring you to the realm of truth.
okay.
So when you do the guide of the perplexed, how do you go from the realm of falsehood to the realm of truth? Through philosophy, and then through Abulafia, through the chanting of names. And that's where, from their point of view, Abulafia flows definitely from Maimonides' guide, because it's yogic.
Yeah. It's amazing how all these things somehow seem intertwined, but then when you really dive into it and you give us the explanations, there really are these vast differences. Just like you were sharing before, that yes, there's all these things in common, and also so many of these differences, and they're all just merging.
Um, other good stories from, um, from India, I then traveled around in different places. And then I
What
went
about,
back
yeah,
subsequent trips.
give us another, let's hit two more. Give us something from the UAE.
So the UAE is, I discovered that, so like I said, I was there before the Abraham Accords. I spoke in Khalifa University. I have a friend there who brought me into the classroom. And besides that, I was there at this official peace forum run by Prince Zayed, which was, their part of reconciliation, because contemporary Muslims really want to stamp out the Islamicist movement. And part of the way they do it is to show that the tolerance toward other religions, but they want to hear from other religions. And so the year I was there, I mean, 'cause I've been there more than once also, but the year that first time there, it was really the Jews and the evangelicals who were speaking. They had the Catholics, I think, the year before, to get up there and speak. But I discovered how much they themselves were seeking now,
Hmm.
because their Islamicist years did away with a lot of their folk beliefs, and therefore they've got to reclaim their own sense, and did away with their Sufism and their all the devotional practices. So they've got to move from their juridical law centered back to other things,
It's
and
amazing.
learning that firsthand.
It's amazing that you sort of got to be witness to some of that, right? That their transition,
Yeah.
right? That's kind of
But
amazing.
interfaith knowledge is picking up on it and knowing where they are, keeping up on it, speaking to them, having productive conversations in the classroom, knowing where they're at.
Yeah. Okay, give us one more, maybe a Jakarta story. And then Jason, I want to ask you because I know that you've connected with people from all over the world too. So I want to see how that plays into what you've been working on also.
So, a story, let me give you one from a good Indonesian story. Um,
You're like, there's
so I've
too
been there
many.
back.
How do I choose? Go ahead,
What?
sorry. I said, there's so many. Which one do I choose? That's where you are.
So the most impressive one is that I was a keynote speaker at the R20 conference, part of the G20 summit, which is really cool.
I'm
And
sure.
really, and I got to do that, and it was very nice speaking on the podium there.
That's amazing.
Um, but the best story. are really like, um, going with them and seeing it's a very Sufi country where then it became Islamic through Sufism, and the presence of Sufi shrines and Sufi singing and Sufi mysticism is very, very strong in the country. And so therefore I was even told to emphasize mysticism and experiential, because that they'll get.
Yeah.
Um, that they get well, that they understand well. Um, I just want to think of the best story. I mean, the best is really I went around and I spoke in many Islamic colleges through
Wow.
Indonesia, and seeing how many of them are I mean, one they expected only 20, 30 people to come. One college I got 120 people showing up,
Mhm. That's
and people having sweatshirts in Hebrew that they've got Hebrew clubs
amazing.
because they know it's a cognate of Arabic.
Yeah.
They understand that.
That's really cool. Jason, I'm sure you have similar stories, right? You're seeing people with the music permutations and Abulafia's trainings, and they're having a transition and a journey of their own. What has your experience been, Jason, when you talk to these people in Uganda and these other places that far-reaching that otherwise you may not have had a connection with, Jason?
Shoshana, I mean, I've had the pleasure to know William Ruiz for 20 years. I met him in New York City in the subway. He's a world traveler. And recently, as I got better at teaching Abulafia, he introduced his world musician friends. And I did start in Bali, Indonesia, with Wayan Gama, whose English is not particularly great, but good enough. And we started talking about permutations. But as I've gotten to know him and people in Uganda and Colombia and now in India, and we're going to start in Sri Lanka, the idea that you speak a common language has been some type of new bond that I just did not expect. I thought we would collaborate. I thought we'd have a sense of unity, but the brotherhood and the humanhood of speaking the same language and talking about the permutations, it is that amazing experience, even through the computer, that we're in this together. And I've seen us go from, I would say, go from that kind of interfaith model where I'm a Jewish person playing music and they're maybe Hindu or Muslim or Sufi, and of course we're very cordial, but we've developed and grown something even more through this common language that I've been even surprised by. It's been very beautiful. So the universalism and the permutations have built a bond that is quite unique.
I want to push the Bali aspect. Know that in Indonesia, being a Muslim country, Hinduism, Buddhism, Confucianism grew up under Islam. So they define themselves as monotheists with scripture and revelation, and the commonality, whatever developed in other parts of the world, is understand there's a natural sense that whatever Jason is doing with those of gamelan music in Indonesia, they're going to find a very similar Islamo Hindu and Islamo Buddhist versions in their own culture.
Yeah.
I did notice that. I'll say I did notice that the connection with my Hindu friend Wayan Gama, he was telling me about God and the belief in God, and I was kind of expecting to hear about other things, but I was very surprised by that, and this does clarify that for me.
And that's the most important point. Almost nothing in your intro to religion, world religions textbook is correct. They're all about essences, not about really on the ground. They don't deal that Hinduism and Buddhism in Indonesia grew up under Islam and thinks in Islamic categories. On the other hand, all these books present Judaism starting with the Torah, starting with Leviticus, and I can't mention how many times when I was in India that people asked me, "Oh, so you still give sacrifices like in Leviticus?"
Oh boy.
Because that's what it's in there. If you
Yeah.
look in any world religion textbook, it starts with the five books of Moses.
Right.
And then I say, no, we don't do it. And the next thing is, oh, your 19th century reformers got rid of it.
Oh no. Yikes.
Because if you look at almost any of the major textbooks on religion, you could rattle off their names. None of them mention the Talmud, none of them mention Rabbinic Judaism. They really go from Bible, prophets, to Middle Ages, to modernity and
Right.
know that
Works for
what
you.
they write about Hinduism and Buddhism is pretty similar.
Yeah, again, it really, this whole concept that we really do have so much more in common than what separates us really is kind of the through line through all this, and we just continue to learn from each other, I think is a lovely message to share. Before we wrap up, we've just got a few minutes left, but I wanted you, please, Dr. Brill, you have a new book. Could you chat with us about that? Tell us the
So,
title, all the things.
so I'm not sure which is being called. The last one out was Rabbi on the Ganges,
Yeah.
the Jewish Hindu Encounter.
Okay,
And you
let's
can
do
go
that.
buy it. It's a good read. The Hindus love it because it's a very sympathetic read of Hinduism. Because like you can see, I really understood and got into their heads of what things were like, about where we're the same and different. Um, Rabbi on the Ganges. It's on Amazon. All that. The
Okay.
next one coming out is Jewish Trinity, a Jewish view of contemporary Christian theology. That'll be out couple of months or something,
Okay.
where I then say, do some of the same things to Catholicism, that we have a certain magnifying of small differences, that we met with that during periods of hatred and persecution, we magnified rather than in our rather post-polemical age, we could
Yeah.
look at rather differently.
Yeah. What is your process for writing these books?
What is my process?
Mm-hmm.
Um, my process is the Hindu book was really coming home at the end of the day, taking notes, writing scenarios. I blogged extensively at the time,
Mm-hmm.
getting first drafts out there,
Yep.
and then pulling it together.
Okay.
This new one for Catholicism comes from many years of teaching. You know, if you're answering Catholic students, you get used to the answers of explaining where we use the word Shekhinah differently than
Right.
the way they're using it, as saying, I'm going to put the Shekhinah on my heart and therefore have a resolution to the issue, rather American locution, which Jews will never, do not say that.
No, not so much. Yeah, I don't foresee that happening.
But that's
Um,
being able to explain that,
right. Right.
that
It's
we're, that despite everything, we can see each other, but we still have different systems
right.
and to our
Right.
ways of talking about things.
Right. Dr. Brill, you are fascinating, and like I want all of the stories. Jason, we're gonna wrap up here in just a couple of minutes. Are there any last thoughts you wanted to share?
I did. I just want to thank Dr. Brill. Thank you so much for the insights here. We try to find guests that will challenge us and make us think of things different. And you've been so successful with me thinking about all the ways I'm going to re-watch this video and think about the things you've said. We've had a lot of people who talk about jazz. There are different faith traditions. We have Sikhs on and so forth. But in my own life as a Jew, this has been very expanding. Think about different models of universalism or interreligious. You've really summed it up and covered so much ground in 55 minutes for us. I wanted to thank Shoshana for hosting. I wanted to thank our friends in the audience, the Kaplans, Wachtels, for joining. So nice to have people live, and I know we'll have a lot of people watching. I want to thank Michael Bayo, Rabbi Bayo of the JC of East Valley. Thank you so much for your support. Thank you so much for the Bridge Institute, for the board members, for your support. Your support made this happen. But once again, Dr. Brill, you've really given us such, I would say, hopeful message of
Mhm.
dialogue, collaboration, religions working together, really honoring the name of God instead of some of the things that go on opposite to that, and a path forward. So it's just been such a pleasure to have you.
Okay. Thank you. It's been a pleasure to be, and I must put, if we have any people who are educators or clergy, whether in Indonesia, India, East Africa, who want to do a degree in, interfaith and Jewish Christian studies, we have scholarships and online courses. The catch is to be an educator or a clergy, because it's
Excellent.
all coming out of specific pockets depending on where you're coming from. Right now, we have a lot of Catholic clergy from East Africa, from India. We're hoping to get from Indonesia. Um, so don't rule that out also, or think about it if anyone's looking for a degree in these topics,
I love that. That's amazing.
I'll say
or a 4-course certificate.
I'll say we're doing this towards the end of the meeting. I'll make sure in the Facebook post to put that up. And Dr. Brill, I'll follow up with you for any links that I can add to that so the people who do watch our videos in Indonesia and East Africa can see that. That is fantastic.
Or even in America. That's fine in America. But America, there are,
Wonderful. This has been fantastic. Thank you to everyone again, Jason. Lovely.
it's been a pleasure to be here.
Thank you, Dr. Brill.
Thank you,
Okay,
everybody.
bye-bye.
Bye.